All right, part two, we left off with me pleading guilty and getting ready to meet with pretrial probation officer. So if you have not listened to part one and two, go ahead, go back, listen to those so you can be caught up, and then come back to this. I forgot one of the important parts. So before I went to the pretrial probation office, I had to go to the U.S. Marshals there in the courthouse to get fingerprinted and to get my DNA taken and photographed and all that stuff. I still haven't seen my mugshot. I'll have to request my records from the FBI so I can actually see my mugshot. But it was an interesting process. You ring the doorbell or knock on the door, and a U.S. Marshal comes to it and lets me in. At this point, I am the only one in. My attorney doesn't go in, nobody else. It's just me. So he takes me in there. He says, "Oh, what are you in here for? Fraud?" And I was like, "No, I'm in here for an antitrust violation." And I don't think he really knew what that was. But he's like, "Oh, usually the guys that are dressed like their attorneys are in here for fraud." So he thought because I was dressed up, looked nice, that I was there for fraud. So he proceeded to take my picture and do everything, and then the door rang again. He said, "Well, I can't leave you sitting here while I go get the door, so I'm gonna have to put you in a cell." So I was locked in a cell at the federal courthouse in Minneapolis. I was probably there for about 2 minutes. He gave me my own cell. Everybody else was across the hall. I could see them, but I was in my own cell. So this is the point where anytime my daughter brings a new boy around, that I tell him I'm not afraid to go back to prison. I let him know that I'm a felon and I'm not afraid to go back to prison, even though that prison time was about 2 minutes. But it is just funny. So met with the pretrial probation officer there in Minneapolis. She was a pretty cool lady. She said, she had me explain to her what happened, what exactly I was being charged with, and it was me and my wife and my attorney all there in the room with her. And so we explained it, I explained it, and then my attorney kind of filled in some gaps. She said, "Let me get this straight," and kind of re-explained it. And she's like, "I've probably done that," So she figured she'd probably done that before, maybe with a friend or something. And this is one of the few felonies that does not legally take away your right to own firearms. There is a specific stipulation in the firearms code that exempts antitrust crimes from the ban on felons having firearms. So federally, I'm still allowed to have firearms. I've tried to purchase one since, and that came back as denied, and so I just haven't hired another attorney yet. But I've talked to a firearms attorney, and he said that he'd need to write a letter to the FBI and explain it and make sure they have it filed right, because it most likely did not get filed right when it got either with the court or at the FBI, and so that's why it came up as denied by the ATF. But I did have to relinquish my firearms for the while I was on pretrial probation and while I was on probation afterwards. So I pled guilty in 2019. The case finalized in 2020. So that whole time I wasn't able to have firearms. That whole time, in those 3 years, I met with the probation officer in Minnesota, twice, maybe talked to her on the phone, 3 or 4 times. Had one guy from the federal probation office here in Dallas come out and make sure I lived where I said I did. And he's ultimately the one that, once I was actually on probation, he took over that duty. So I'm on pretrial probation, waiting on the other two cases to progress, waiting on Alan and Igor's cases to progress and find for them to go through to sentencing. So Alan was the first to be sentenced, and he was what we referred to was the ringleader, what the government referred to as the ringleader, since he's the one that coordinated everything in this. So he was the one that was sentenced first, because Igor also was prepared to cooperate with the government against Alan. So it looked like Alan was going to go to trial, and I think that's part of what took so long in the case. It got real close to trial, and it was probably a month before the trial, and they were going to want to fly me up and talk to me and go over my testimony and all that. And then I think within a couple weeks before trial, they were able to reach a plea agreement with Alan, and so it didn't end up going to trial, and they didn't end up needing me to testify against him. I think Alan ended up getting a year probation on this case, and probably somewhere around $2,200 in restitution and a $1,200 fine. The second guy, I think, got about the same, about a year probation and then $2,200 in restitution and $1,200 fine. So I got the largest restitution because I purchased more items, even though it wasn't purchased with them. I purchased more items in general, and they didn't want to, they said you couldn't distinguish from when I bought them and when I bought them with them. So on that whole volume of commerce that I bought, I had to pay restitution on. My attorney, he attended the sentencing for Igor, and in that case, the judge stated